This is Buffalo State Data Talk, the podcast where we introduce you to how data is used and explore careers that involve data.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Buffalo State Data Talk. I'm your host, Heather Campbell, and thank you for joining us for episode 22. Today, we'll be talking to Onyinye Daniel, Vice President of Data and Analytics Strategy at Highmark Health. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather. Very, very happy to be here.
So just to start us off, could you give us a general overview of what you do as a VP at Highmark?
My responsibilities are pretty broad. So one, I'm responsible for the data and analytics strategy, kind of communicating that throughout the enterprise, developing it, and then seeing to evolve it and communicate it throughout the enterprise, really trying to articulate who we are as a data and analytics organization, both relative to Highmark, but also relative to the broader healthcare industry. And so that's really important to be able to translate what we do and what our goals are and how they could potentially support enterprise priorities, but also how they really push Highmark to be a leading organization in data and analytics. And so that's a really huge part of my responsibilities. I have accountability for our data and AI ethics strategy and operationalization plan. So really making sure that it's not just like what we can do with data and how we use data, but should we be leveraging the data in this way? Should we be leveraging this type of data? What are the ethical implications for the use of that data for our patients, members, the community? Part of it is around analytics governance and making sure that we're leveraging analytics in a consistent way. Part of it is like the algorithms that we use in our models are explainable, transparent, that we're not introducing new biases. Part of it is just like standardization, making sure that we are very intentional about communicating why or how a model is intended to be used, right? Rather than just kind of a free-for-all. So there's some consistency and standardization. I also have our enterprise data and analytics research agenda. And so really pulling together, like as a data and analytics organization, what are the areas of research that we should be exploring, right? Like, some of the areas around voice analytics, a lot of remote monitoring, things that may not necessarily be driving business value today, but have the potential to improve health outcomes down the line or improve efficiencies or cost savings or better engagement.
Well, that is definitely a lot that you and your team are working on. I'm impressed. How would you say that your time is split between working collaboratively with people on your team and working independently?
I spend a lot of time in meetings. And I would say, probably like 80% of my time is in meetings. And I try to build in when I can, like 30-minute blocks, like really thinking through frameworks and processes.
As somebody who is a VP and who is more on the management administrative side of things, can you tell us what kind of data Highmark is analyzing? I know that you probably spend more time on the management side, but what are your data analysts analyzing?
Oh, there's so much. So we have, as a health organization, a blended health organization, because we're a payer, but we also have a hospital system. We have lots of data, lots of clinical data, right? We have a lot of like diagnoses data, procedures data. If you had like an arm surgery, like we have all of that information. We have data around providers, like provider data, clinicians. Aside from that, one area that we've been really scaling out since last year has been really expanding the diversity of our data sources, right? So such as social determinants of health data. So you'll see that we have expanded our publicly available data sets, research data, kind of state and federal data sets, environmental data, grocery store data, just a myriad of different sources of data that we believe help to craft a more precise story around where our patients and members live, how they, interact with their environment and some of the things that can potentially impact their health outcomes for better or worse, right? And so it's really important for us to be very intentional about expanding the diversity of that data because that also feeds into the models that we create, right? And an algorithm or a model is really only as good as the data that you feed it, right?
Yes.
So that is, really key. And so in order to like really tune and refine our models and algorithms, you really should have better sources and more sources of data, good data, to build them.
Yeah, and with all this patient and provider and, health data in general, what are you guys doing with it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in general, we are so committed to creating like a remarkable health experience for our patients and our members, and everything that we do is geared towards that. And so all of the data that we're using, all the algorithms that we're building, all the advanced analytics capabilities, all of that is geared towards, how can we improve health outcomes for our patients and our members? How can we improve their experience, right? Engaging with the healthcare system, which hasn't always been the best experience. How can we improve that? How can we create a great health experience? But how can we also create a great experience for providers? Like that's a little bit of a newer concept. I'd say like the last 5 years or so is, clinicians, providers really deserve to have a really good experience and to have a seamless experience when they're interacting with patients so that they can focus on the patient. So what types of capabilities can we create so that they have that experience and they're happy? And then we also leverage that data to see how we can reduce healthcare costs, right? And so are there opportunities for us to like reduce administrative costs associated with obtaining care or, any myriad of like interventions? Like how do we really kind of bend the cost curve so that we can at least slow down the growth of healthcare costs in the US? So those are like the four, you can call it the quadruple aim. Those are like the four objectives. It's the backbone of everything we do. Everything we do is geared towards those objectives.
Could you possibly give me like an example of a success that you had when, looking at some of this data?
There have been so many successes. I mean, I know we've created capabilities around our care coordination and kind of clinical operational excellence. So being able to free up nurses' time so that they're not spending inordinate amounts of time reviewing patient records, but kind of introducing some automation into their workflow so that they're able to spend their time doing things that are more productive and that are more knowledge based rather than kind of rote.
And one of the things you were mentioning in your job description was some of the data analytics, like software or programs.
I can tell you about the systems that we're using.
Yeah.
So there's a few. I mean, you can kind of bucket them in kind of like, so you have some analytics platforms. You may also have like data specific platforms, and sometimes the two are used interchangeably. Like SAS, for example, sometimes like should be used for analytics, but oftentimes gets used for like ETL stuff. So ETL, sorry. So like shaping data, like transferring data, loading it so that you can run analytics on it. Like that should be done by with a data platform, like SQL or Oracle or, something like that. Not necessarily SAS, but that's one example where kind of because of the pervasiveness of SAS throughout a lot, legacy organizations and all that, people are just comfortable using it for both. But like some of the analytics tools we use that, maybe your audience might be familiar with, R. We're using R. We're using some folks use Python. We've got some folks using Alteryx still. SAS, obviously. From a visualization perspective, Tableau, Power BI, those are the two main platforms. And then we are kind of expanding. So we have a partnership with Google. We're working very closely with them. So there are going to be some tools like BigQuery, which I think is more on the data side. So using some Google tools, those are kind of, we're transitioning in to make that more pervasive in the organization. But like those are like the main tools on the analytics side. And then, I mean, on the data side, there's Denodo, which is kind of like a data virtualization tool, which it helps you essentially be able to integrate data without actually having to go into each of the disparate data sources, but you could still kind of pull it together. So I hope I was able to communicate that kind of like a simplified way. Um, and then you have like other tools like data governance tools. So the organization, you have to be somewhat mature well, ideally very mature in how your data is governed, right? And that is part of making sure that we're doing our due diligence as trusted stewards of the data. And while a lot of that is heavily premised on the people component, so making sure that people are, aware, using the data appropriately, going through the proper protocols and approvals and all that for how to use the data, we also have some tools to support that. So I know Calibra is one tool that we're using to support it. So those are just kind of a few of the tools that we use for like analytics, data governance.
Yeah, all the typical data science tools, of course. Yeah. So could you talk about a challenge that you have had to overcome in your position, and how did you solve it?
I'd say that one like practical challenge was like when I came to Highmark, I had to build my team. I really had to create the vision for my team and kind of construct what I felt would help me, help us be successful and deliver on the accountabilities that I talked about in the beginning, right? And so I had to really think about the roles. What am I working with? Like, I had a very small team. The assumption of not really getting a robust budget. So working within like those confines and still having to construct like what my team is set to do, the expectations, how we're going to be successful and really get the ball rolling, moving down that path, I think is a pretty big challenge.
And what kinds of, professional development are you finding? Like, where do you find these things, and where could other data scientists look for these opportunities?
Yeah, I look everywhere. I mean, I Google. I look at professional organizations. I'm in a Highmark specific leadership development program right now. I am searching for like areas where I might not be as strong as I want to be, like finance. I think that's an area where I could be a lot stronger. So are there short courses or certifications that I can take in that area? I look at different universities, MIT, Yale, UIC, and I also have done several certifications, right? Like agile delivery, how to deliver large organizational products, really, in an agile way. So safe agile certification, lean portfolio management. These are things that I feel like high school and college students can explore, and you would be setting yourself on the right path because you're understanding how work is done and how large products and projects are delivered in organizations. So you're getting a head start before you even get there. You're like somewhat familiar. And the other thing I do is I invested in hard skills when I was still like hands-on keyboard, writing code, programming and all that. I invested in courses. I remember when Tableau was like kind of new. Now it's not new now, but back then it was like a little bit new. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to invest and take, these like a series of 2-day courses because I was a SAS, I grew up with SAS and Stata for economics and things like that. And I was like, well, this is like newer. So I could do like R and Tableau and just invested, paid, leveraged, if there's tuition reimbursement, I leveraged that. But it was a really worthy investment, especially as I was building my career and I was still programming and still like doing my own analytics. That was really helpful.
Yeah, staying up to date in data science, kid, there's always something new to learn. So there's always lots of classes available to enhance your skills.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned your background and the education that you've done, and your background is actually in health policy administration. So how did you transition from health policy to, data science?
Yeah, so my background is pretty interesting. I feel like it all kind of meshes together I mean, I started off with biology and chemistry. Back in the day, I thought I always was interested in healthcare, period. But I used to think that I wanted to be a doctor. But I would say, like in high school, and after like maybe freshman year of college, I didn't want to be at the bedside, and I also didn't want the lifestyle. Like I didn't want to have to work on the weekend. I love working. I work hard, but that's just not what I wanted. And I didn't want the bedside. I wanted something broader in healthcare. So I thought about like global health and public health. Like those were the things that really interested me. But then I liked technology. I liked data. It's just something that had always interested me from college on. But I liked data, I liked technology, and I liked the application of data to healthcare. And I was fortunate, I think, to when I was applying to grad school, to find a program at the University of Illinois at Chicago that really married data, technology, and public health. And it was public health informatics. And it was perfect because it like combined everything. Plus, I went into my grad program after finishing my master's at Northwestern. I went into my grad program right as the Affordable Care Act was like being, solidified. So 2011. So it was perfect. Meaningful use, EMRs, data, public health. I mean, it was just great. So clearly very exciting. And so that program allowed me to combine all of my passions. And in my current role, I use everything. I read legislation that relates to data and analytics in healthcare, and I have to interpret it and be able to kind of conceptualize what the technical implications are for this legislation on healthcare systems or on payers. I leverage my ethics background, data ethics, AI ethics, philosophy, principles, the health aspect, public health. We get to like work on cool things that are going to improve, patients and members, people's health outcomes.
I love listening to people when they're excited about their work. You could just tell how much you like this. So you were mentioning a lot about, ethics in data and how it's important for data management and data science. But this is an area that people don't always focus on when people are thinking about data. They're thinking about analytics or visualization. And sometimes the whole data ethics side gets pushed to the side, but it's so important. So could you tell us, a little bit about why data ethics are so important, especially in the field that you're working in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, thinking about data ethics, it's almost like you have to think about just ethics in and of itself and how it's applicable to any profession. It's really about doing the right thing. And to me, in the data space and the analytics space, there's always excitement about all these new and cool things we can do with data. Like, look at these neural networks, look at these models, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's all great. But at the end of the day, we have to do the right thing with this data, do the right thing by our patients and members with this data. And that means we have to ask the questions before we build the models. Yes. And we have to ask the question before we get to a certain point. We really have to do it as a baseline first step to say, have we thought through the ethical implications for the use of this data standalone, but also for how it's going to be used in the models and for the potential outcomes that could be generated and the unintended consequences from the use of this data. So it just makes more sense to ask the critical questions and take a position beforehand than to try to like do it after you've messed up and now you're on the front page news, right? So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it's about doing the right thing.
You've worked in a number of different areas within healthcare, including, on the research side at a hospital and now on the payer side in health insurance. So can you tell me a little bit about how the responsibilities are different in these different sectors and what made you decide to focus on the health insurance payer side?
Yeah. I started in clinical research, data management, academic research, and it was nice. It wasn't very challenging to me. Well, I would say it was obviously challenging in the beginning, but then it got really I got really good at it. So I was comfortable, and that's not my preferred state of being. So I left the clinical research and went to the hospital side. So I was working, doing clinical analytics for a large Catholic health system at the time. And since merged and been acquired multiple times since I was there. So I don't even know what it's called now. I would say that on the hospital side, it was a little bit slower, a little bit less technologically savvy, a little bit more challenging, a lot of bureaucracy, but lots of opportunity for improvement and for growth and for kind of modernizing how things are done on the hospital side. And that's one of the benefits, I think, on that side of the house or the industry was just that there was so much opportunity for growth. You could really see the horizon of opportunity in terms of improving how we collect data, how we share data, how we leverage EMRs, how we improve provider workflows and things like that. And EMRs, electronic medical records. I left the hospital system and went over to the vendor side, which is where I think I built more of my technical chops. I feel like that was really valuable because it really brought me out of just like the analytics programming capabilities. And really, I was able to work more on the data side and, with Oracle and Redshift and all that. It just expanded my technical knowledge, which I think helps in terms of inputs to like, when I'm managing a team, I'm not operating off of theory, right? I have the practical hands-on experience to at least be able to speak to like what's being developed. When I left there, I came to the payer side. And to be honest, I think the payer side was the most fun. Like it just, I don't know. I just really liked it. I was managing analytics consulting. And so getting more into like health outcomes for provider groups and, analytics around that. And how can we generate insights that are going to be actionable that these provider groups can leverage to better target interventions for certain conditions, close care gaps and things like that. That was really exciting to me, which is why I really liked the payer space. So this is my favorite space, really. Just because of like the connection to both the payer and the provider and the patient and members and just the wealth of data we're able to use.
So if one of our listeners is interested in becoming a data scientist, specifically, in the area that you work in, what resources would you suggest that they check out?
Looking at like user community groups for the, maybe the applications that you prefer. Like if you're an R enthusiast, like joining those community groups or Python or joining those groups and then looking to see if there are conferences or opportunities to, network with or work with others who have that general shared interest, I think will help you refine your goals or like what you truly want to do.
As somebody who is a manager and who has, people have worked under her and has potentially mentored new or up and coming data scientists, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in working as a data scientist?
I would say, I think it ties in with kind of how do you refine your goals in terms of what you want to do for your career. And for that, it's, it could come through the different conferences, right? And user groups. And, if you're able to connect with someone that's in the field or through an internship or mentorship program, types of bridge programs, pipeline programs. Some organizations have like pipeline programs that go all the way through like to high school level where you could shadow someone or intern for a summer, short stints that'll help you get exposure. I think that's probably the most important thing because you're always going to be learning. The technology is always going to be changing. And so you want to make sure you're getting the people aspect, you're getting exposure within the field.
Onyinye, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This has been fun. I really appreciate it.
And to all of our listeners, if you haven't already, check out our previous podcasts. They're available wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information about starting your career as a data scientist, go to dataanalytics.buffalostate.edu. And don't forget to subscribe so that you get notified each time we release a new episode of Buffalo State Data Talk.